Let's now use a process called populate in order to actually get access to the referenced tour guides whenever we query for a certain tour. So in the last video, we created a reference to the user here in this guides field, right, in our tour model, right? And now we're going to use populate in order to basically replace the fields that we referenced with the actual related data. And the result of that will look as if the data has always been embedded, when in fact, as we know, it is in a completely different collection, okay? Now the populate process always happens in a query. And so let's now go to our tour controller and then write to the function where we get a single tour. So here in getTour, and here's our query, right? So this here is where we build our query, and now all we need to do is to add the populate to the query. So populate, and then the name of the field which we actually want to populate. And that is called guides. Okay? And if you think about it, this name actually makes sense. So we want to populate, so basically to fill up the field called guides in our model, right? So again, this guides field only contains the reference. And with populate, we're then going to fill it up with the actual data. All right? And again, only in the query and not in the actual database. Okay? So this is really all we need to do. And let's now take a look at the result. Okay? So this is the ID of the tour. And let's remember that this is how the guides look right now. Okay? But if we now get tour, and with that ID, then let's now wait for it. And indeed, here is the data about the guides. Okay? So these two elements that we had in the guides array have now been populated with the actual data. And if we now take a look at get all tours, let's actually get rid of some of this stuff here. We have too much stuff open here. So if we now get all the tours, okay, then let's scroll to the end where the new one should be. And apparently it's not. Well, oh, that's because I have this filter here. Let's get rid of that. And now I have my 10 results. And actually it's right here. So the new test tour. And now you see that in here, it's back to showing us only the values that are actually in the database. So let's also confirm that here in Compass. And so indeed, as you see, we still do not have the actual data in here in the database, but only really the IDs. Okay? And it's only that populate step which will then replace these IDs with the actual data. Okay? And so right here, that doesn't happen, well, because we didn't implement the populate in the get all tours route handler. Okay? Now let me just show you a small trick that we can do with the populate function, which is to actually also just select a certain fields. So for example, we're not interested in this v property here, and also not in password change that, right? So that's not the kind of data that we want about our tour guides. And so here in populate, we can actually specify that. So instead of just passing in the string, we can create an object of options. And then we can say the path is guides. So basically the name of the field we want to replace. And then, as usual, we can use select and then minus this one here. And also the other one. So password change that. That's just easier to copy. All right. So let's change it here and send this again. And this is, of course, not the right route. So sorry for that. I think I also used it before, actually, where really I wanted to show you this one, right? And so sorry for that. But still, what we want to get rid of here is this v and this password change that. And so we already did that. So if we send it now, then of course, we only get the data that we're interested in. All right. So this populate function is an absolutely fundamental tool for working with data in Mongoose, and especially, of course, when there are relationships between data. Okay, so you should always know exactly how and when to use it for your own applications. And in order to train for that, we will of course use it many times more throughout this section. Now, just one thing that I want you to keep in mind is that behind the scenes, using Populate will still actually create a new query. And so this might affect your performance. Okay? Of course, if you only do it once or twice and in a kind of small application, then that small hit on performance is no big deal at all. But in a huge application with tons of populates all over the place, then that might indeed have some kind of effect. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Okay? And really it makes sense, right? Because how else would Mongoose be able to get data about tours and users at the same time? It needs to create a new query basically in order to be able to create this connection. Okay, and now just to finish this, let's remember what I showed you, that this actually didn't work when we get all the tours. So remember how in this situation, we still simply get the IDs of the tour guides and not the referenced user data. Okay, and so one solution would basically be to copy this code here, so this populate function, also here into this route handler. But of course, duplicate code is never a good idea. And I hope that you already know at this point of a better way of doing this. And the answer to that is query middleware. Okay, so let's quickly go ahead and move to our model. And I'm copying this code here now. And so, yeah, let's do that right here. So, pre, and then I will actually, just as before, do it with a regular expression, which is then going to work for everything that starts with find. So just like this. Okay, and of course, we do this in query middleware, well, because this is the kind of middleware that is going to run each time there is a query, right? Let's just put all of these pre-middlewares together, and then after that, have the post one. All right. So let me copy the code that we had before, and now let's just add it to this, because remember that in query middleware, this always points to the current query. And so now basically all of the queries will then automatically populate the guides field with the referenced user. Okay, and so we can now get rid of it here. And yeah, that's actually it. So now we do it here instead of doing it in two places in a controller. And so this is a nice little trick in case that you always want to populate all your documents. So let's test that out. First, if it still works here. And indeed it does. So we get our two users. And then let's test it here where it didn't work before, and now it does. So here's the result of that. And now, just to make sure that it does actually work, let's also update it and basically add another tour guide. So let's copy the ID of the tour here, then update tour. So we need to put the ID here, and then in the body, let's get it from create tour. So this guides, and put that here. And then we also need to get our other user. So it's this one here, which is actually not a guide or not even an admin, but still, this is just for testing. And so let's grab this ID and then go ahead and put it here. So let's update it. That still works. And so now, actually, even in this output, we already have the populated data. Okay, because in our regular expression, remember, we used find. And so this updating here is implemented using find by ID and update. And so it also starts with find. And so therefore, the query middleware that we wrote before also applies to this function. Okay, and so this is how populating works. Okay, so again, extremely important tool in your Mongoose toolbox. All right. And just to make sure, let's take 15 seconds here to recap. So this is a two-step process. First, you create a reference to another model. And so with this, you effectively create the relationship between these two data sets. Then in the second step, you populate that field that you just specified before, so guides, using the populate method. All right. So very simple, very straightforward. All you need is to really understand the logic behind all of this, and then you're ready to actually start using it.